Topic of our Dhamma talk this evening is going to be the imperfections of insight in the Pali scriptural language known as Vipassana Upakilesa. Now, the meditation practice is unfolding not in a haphazard manner, but rather in a pretty systematic manner. And whether a meditator is from the Americas or from Iceland or from, let's say, from somewhere in Africa or New Zealand or somewhere in Asia, it really doesn't matter. The main experiences will be more or less the same. And over the centuries, many meditators have practiced according to the teachings of the Buddha, in particular the teachings given in the Satipatthana Sutta, and they've had experiences that are very comparable. Now, the path of purification, the Visuddhimagga, is one of the works that, to quite some extent, describes what happens in the meditation practice, how the development in the meditation unfolds. Now, the imperfections of insights are preceded by what is known as the knowledge by comprehension, and part of this knowledge of or knowledge by comprehension is an experience of dukkha. Now, you may still recall this from your own meditation practice. And when the characteristic of unsatisfactoriness is in the foreground, then meditators tend to suffer, and certainly they tend to experience plenty of physical pains, and certainly also plenty of unwholesome mental states, difficult mental states, and those are mostly the hindrances. Now, when a meditator is in the midst of experiencing this dukkha phase, then life will be miserable for this person. So it will not necessarily be a fun experience. However, fortunately, things don't rest therefore ever, but rather the practice moves on. Once a meditator has come to accept the dukkha as dukkha, and is no longer fighting it, and is no longer seeing the dukkha as an enemy, then usually things will move ahead. And it is at that point that then gradually the aspects or gradually objects become much more refined, and then a meditator will get a glimpse of anatta, namely the absence of a self. Now, this then is certainly usually accompanied by the arising of what kind of mental states? Again, some unwholesome mental states or some wholesome mental states? What do you think? Wholesome? Yes, is correct. So, the arising of some wholesome mental states. And those certain wholesome mental states arise frequently, beginning with calmness. Calmness certainly being the most predominant of them, but a number of others also exist, and we shall look at those in the course of the talk today. Now, at first, one, as outlined, certainly one experiences a number of unwholesome, difficult mental states, and then followed by a number of wholesome mental states. So what we have here is, once again, a contrast between unwholesome mental states and wholesome mental states. And it is from this contrast that occurs within just 2 or 3 days that a meditator learns a lot, and from this also wisdom arises. So it is in seeing first the unwholesome mental states and then very soon the wholesome mental states that one gains much clarity about the unwholesome mental states. And then obviously the mind will prefer the wholesome ones. Now, as mentioned already in earlier Dhamma talks, the nature of the untrained mind is to push away the undesirable, unwholesome mental states, and certainly then it tends to get attached to and craves for desirable, wholesome states. Now, this certainly push and certain pull is certainly rather exhausting, and certainly with time and with practice a meditator gradually learns certainly to then keep the mind in a more balanced place. Now, the imperfections, the 10 imperfections of insight in the Pali scriptural language are known as dasa vipassana upakilesa. Dasa is your Pali word for 10, and certainly then upakilesa is impurity, imperfection, anything that spoils or obstructs, and vipassana is your insight. So the 10 impurities of insight or imperfections of insight. What certainly happens is certainly after having passed the suffering, the unsatisfactoriness of formations, and gained some initial understanding about certainly the absence of a self, then things turn around and certainly a number of wholesome mental states arise. Those certain 10 imperfections are as follows. The first one, there are actually 2 lists. The imperfections are the same, however the order is certainly different. So we have the list from the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, which is most or is very much in accordance with the actual development in one's practice, and certainly the other list of imperfections, of 10 imperfections, can be found in the what is it called, the Abhidhammata Sangaha in Pali, namely the comprehensive manual of the Abhidhamma. So we will follow the order as given in the Visuddhimagga. So the first one among those imperfections of insight is illumination, in the Pali scriptural language known as abhasa. This then is followed by wisdom or knowledge, jnana, in the Pali scriptural language. Each of these 10 imperfections will be explained later on in greater detail. Now, number 3 is joy or rapturous delight, piti, in the Pali scriptural language, followed by calmness, passaddhi, and this in turn is followed by happiness, sukha, and then based on these, a determined faith arises, which is known as adhimokkha. Then we have strong energy, bhagaha in the Pali scriptural language, followed by strong mindfulness, upatana, and then the second last is equanimity, upekkha. And finally, nikanti is the last one, namely attachment. Those 10 imperfections of insight are all wholesome or not?
All but one. All but one.
All but one. That's correct. And which one is not wholesome? Nikanti. Now, the very last one, namely attachment, which is a form of greed. Now, to explain in greater detail, the first one as given is illumination, which means that a meditator experiences various light phenomena. And meditators might say they feel as if some brightness is there in the mind, or they feel as if there is some bright light in front of the head, or as if someone is shining a flashlight onto one's face. And sometimes meditators say it seems as if they're seeing some fireworks or some brilliant lights that don't last too long. Now, the experiences of illumination may differ from meditator to meditator, depending on his or her strength of especially mind, especially concentration. And so for some, the experience of illumination will be somewhat weak. For others, it may be stronger. Now, the Visuddhimagga, in its 20th chapter, contains some nice description and illustration for this illustration. So allow me to quote from Venerable Bhikkhu Nyanamuli's translation. So, chapter 22, paragraph 107. Herein, illumination is the illumination due to insight. And what this means is, due to insight, it's an illumination that arises out of vipassana practice, and not necessarily because of other things. When it arises, the meditator thinks, such illumination never arose in me before. I have surely reached the path, and by path here is meant the noble path, the noble supramundane path, Arya Magga. And I have reached fruition. Thus, he or she takes what is not the path to be the path, and what is not fruition to be fruition. When the meditator takes what is not the path to be the path, and what is not fruition to be fruition, the course of his or her insight is interrupted. So the development of one's practice is interrupted, and the meditator drops his or her own basic meditation subjects and sits just enjoying the illumination. How wonderful this experience is, and one just cannot get enough of it. And so, now, this next paragraph is about the different degrees in which meditators have experienced this illumination. But, and I'm quoting, this illumination arises in one bhikkhu illuminating only as much as the seat he is sitting on. In another, the interior of his or her interior of his room. In another, the exterior of his room. In another, the whole monastery, a quarter league, a half league, a league, 2 leagues, 3 leagues. In another bhikkhu, it arises making a single light from the earth's surface up to the Brahma world. So that is by far the strongest in case of illumination. Or for the ordinary bhikkhus. But in the Blessed One, it arose illuminating the 10,000-fold world element. Now, even among the monastics, some form of competition was there. And the next paragraph, namely 109, is wonderful, or testifies to this. This story illustrates how it varies. 2 elders, it seems, were sitting inside a room with a double wall at Chitala Pabata. So Pabata is your mountain, and Chitala is the name of the mountain. And this Chitala Pabata is in Sri Lanka. Yes, based on other passages from the Visuddhimagga. It was the Uposatha of the dark of the moon that day. So there's 2 Uposathas. Uposatha is your day. It's basically either your full moon or the dark moon. So 2 Uposathas in a month. And usually on the Uposatha day, the monastics of a monastery get together and recite the monastic vows. Now, all directions were covered by a blanket of cloud. And at night, the 4-factored gloom prevailed. And please do know, they did not have electricity back then. So the external conditions were such that it was really dark. It couldn't have been any darker than this. Then one elder said, "Venerable Sir, the flowers of the 5 colors on the lion table on the shrine terrace in their monastery are visible to me." To this, the other monk replied, "What you say is nothing wonderful, friend. Actually, the fishes and turtles in the ocean a league away are visible to me right now." And so what we have here are these 2 monastics competing, unknowingly, competing in terms of their experiences of illumination. All of this just goes to show that the intensity of illumination may change or may vary from person to person. Now, from a practical point of view, not each and every meditator who undergoes intensive Vipassana meditation will have certain experiences of illumination. And certainly sometimes when there are group interviews, this causes suffering unnecessarily. Because if in a group of meditators you have one who then happily reports and enthusiastically reports to the teacher, oh, I'm having all these great illumination experiences, and then some other meditator sits there, oh, and doesn't have a single illumination experience, well, then you can imagine that certain second meditator will feel somewhat certain down. Now, in this context, a teacher's certain role is to encourage that certain meditator who's not necessarily, or who's not having illumination experiences. Now, those 10, or not all of the 10 imperfections of insight have to arise. So for some meditators, all of them arise, and for some others, it may be just 9 out of 10 arise, or maybe just 8 of 10, or it may be even less than this. Now, whatever it might be, if illumination phenomena come up in your meditation practice, is good, and certainly then just be mindful of them and then proceed with your practice. If they don't come up, is fine too, and you just observe whatever comes along. Now, when having these wonderful experiences of illumination, just as outlined in the Visuddhimagga earlier on, there are 3 dangers, potential dangers that go along with these experiences. The first one being craving. So you've had one sitting at night time, and so let's say in Nepal, power failure, there's no electricity, and your experience of illumination is so strong that the entire room you're sitting in gets lit up. Now, you yourself might be quite impressed. And the hour is over, you get up, you do your walking meditation, and certainly then after an hour of walking meditation, you decide, well, the previous sitting was so good, let me go for another sit. And so you sit back down, you close your eyes, and then the mind goes, oh, it would be so nice if I could have those illumination experiences back. And so basically, the mind is hoping for, craving for a replay of the earlier illumination experiences. This is a clear-cut case of craving, one of the potential 3 dangers, potential imperfections, or things that cause the mental states to become imperfections. Now, can you think of another potential danger that turns the experience of illumination into an imperfection of insight? Identifying with it? Yes, you could say identifying with it, and then further.
Becoming proud.
Ah, there we go. That's the answer. So, pride and conceit then arises based on this. And so a meditator might then think the following words in his or her mind. Oh, I'm having these wonderful illumination experiences, and so the teacher did not even mention about this. It sure must be the case that the teacher never had experiences of illumination, and now, finally, my practice is better than the teacher's practice. And so one's mind gets filled with pride and conceit. And this will actually not be helpful for one's further meditation practice. And so, in the presence of pride and conceit, one's practice will stagnate. And so, And it's important to be very clear about this. Now, as given in the case in the Visuddhimagga, right at the outset, monastics at the time mistook these experiences of great illumination to be experiences of path and noble path and fruition knowledge. And thinking that the path has been attained, and maybe enlightenment has to do with illumination, and so then with this too, with a wrong view, Mecha, deity in the Pali scriptural language, then with this one's practice will stagnate. So these are the three, namely craving, tanha, and then pride and conceit, mana, and as number 3, wrong view, deity. These are your potential difficulties or potential dangers. Now, as an uninformed and unskilled meditator, one is likely to fall into the trap in one way or another. And so since illumination might be quite an outstanding experience, one then gets carried away. And especially when one practices on one's own without a teacher. And in India this happens again and again. In Lumbini we've had quite a number of meditators who've practiced on their own in India, and then not getting any further in their practice, eventually they realize it's time to be under a teacher, and then it becomes obvious that they got stuck in these imperfections of insight. So a teacher's role in this connection is to inform the meditator about these three potential dangers, and to point out these dangers, and then with this the meditator is warned, and then will be more careful. Now, the second among the 10 imperfections is that of knowledge, jnana in the Pali scriptural language, and the Visuddhimagga defines this as knowledge due to insight. So now there's a clear connection here to the insight practice. And as a meditator keeps observing material and immaterial states, possibly knowledge arises, and that knowledge then gets qualified as unerring, as keen, as incisive, and very sharp, as sharpened, keen as a lightning flash. And that does make quite a lot of sense in the general context of what is happening in one's practice. Earlier on, it certainly took a meditator quite some time to know the nature of an object, and an object would usually stick around for a longer period of time. Now, however, the mind works already much faster. And so when an object arises, it takes only very little time, maybe just a couple of moments, to know the nature of the object. Now, the three potential dangers that were explained in connection with illumination apply to all of the remaining imperfections of insight. And so this, that same set of three potential dangers also applies to this unerring, keen, incisive, and very sharp knowledge. So based on the experience of such keen and unerring knowledge, a meditator might develop a craving for it, might want to experience more of the same, and then might get totally conceited, and might also mistake the experience to be an experience of supramundane path and fruition knowledge, when in fact it is not the case as yet. Now, from a practical point of view, and observing many meditators who've come to interviews and experience and related their experiences concerning these the imperfections of insight, well, this unerring, keen, incisive knowledge oftentimes does not really get mentioned by meditators. So that's an aspect that is somewhat not so highlighted. More frequently, meditators might mention or speak about the third imperfection of insight, which is joy. And there's quite a few things to say about this. This joy too is due to insight, and a meditator is likely to experience 5 kinds of joy. And those 5 kinds of joy are given in a particular order, namely from the weakest type of joy being mentioned first to the strongest being mentioned last. Those 5 kinds of joy are, as number 1, minor joy, and kudaka piti in the Pali scripture language, and then the next one is your momentary joy, kanika piti. The third one is your showering joy, okantika piti. Piti means joy, and then number 4 is your ubeka piti, uplifting joy, and the last one is varana piti, which means pervading joy. Now, I'll explain each and every of those 5. Minor piti covers experiences of chills and thrills in the body. And so some soothing experiences go through the body. Also into this category fall experiences such as having goosebumps, sometimes also referred to as goose flesh, and as number 4, the body hairs standing on ends. So those 4 things. And as mentioned, these are relatively mild experiences. Now, next we have momentary joy, kanika piti, which then covers experiences of a sudden and very short, let's say, electrical current running through the body. And or as if lightning is going through the body. Now, this is not necessarily, for most meditators, especially from highly industrialized countries, do not quite understand why this experience comes under joy. It's not really perceived as an experience of joy. Nonetheless, it figures under this or under the imperfections of insight, since it's actually happening. Now, then, as number 3, we have Okantika Piti, showering joy, which the Visuddhimagga explains and illustrates as if one were to sit on the beach right next to the shoreline, and a big wave is coming in, but not a tsunami wave, and and then breaking over the body. So the body then gets covered all over with water. These first three types of joy, minor joy, momentary joy, and showering joy, are classified as dubolo piti, namely weak or mild joy. The remaining two, namely the uplifting joy, the pervading joy, are referred to in the Pali scripture language as balawak piti, namely strong joy or rapture. Now, ubeka piti, which is your uplifting joy, should be taken literally. And it covers experiences of meditators quietly sitting on their meditation cushion, and all of a sudden the body jumps up by a foot or two. Sometimes when the experience is quite pronounced, it may happen that a meditator even all of a sudden gets tossed off the cushion and finds himself or herself lying on the or landing on the floor. To the meditator's big surprise, and also to the big astonishment of the fellow meditators. And so they might be, all of a sudden they hear this big bang, and then most people will no longer restrain their senses and will be tempted and will open their eyes and will then check what is going on in the hall. Now, in Lumbini, and I've shared this before elsewhere, in Lumbini on one day, sometime a number of years back in the past, we had a group of pretty good meditators, and they were all sitting in the front row. And it so happened that within one and the same sitting, one meditator was jumping up and down, the next meditator was swaying violently back and forth, and the third one was literally getting tossed off his cushion. And so you can imagine there was quite some laughter going on in the hall. And but they were all okay. No serious damages occurred. So that's your uplifting joy. I remember, oh my goodness, time. So, well, you want to hear the story? The story about the Mahasi Meditation Center. This happened before my time. I just heard from others. So, at the Mahasi main meditation center, there's back then there was a hostel, an old hostel for the foreign male meditators, and then another hostel also for the foreign ladies. And so it happened that I think it was a monastic, a monk from Thailand, who was the male meditators all had their own individual room. And so there was a door to the room, and then also those mosquito screens instead of a window, and a corridor going by the windows. And so from the corridor, one could certainly, if one wanted to, look into the room, or into the rooms. And so this Thai monk, it appears, every day in the afternoon at a certain time, let's say 4 o'clock, his practice was at such a point that he experienced this ubeka piti. He was sitting on his bed quietly, and all of a sudden he would get tossed off his bed and he would end up crashing onto the ground. Since it happened with such regularity, he said, this is really something, let others enjoy. And he invited the other foreign male meditators who were staying in that same building and said, please assemble around 4 o'clock in front of my window and you will be pleased to see something interesting. And so his fellow meditators were there, had gathered there at the mosquito screen. Sure enough, the Thai monk was sitting on the bed doing sincere and eager practice, and all of a sudden this man gets thrown off his bed and he comes crashing, he lands crashing on the ground. And so in his case too, also no serious damage done. So these certain things do happen in the meditation practice. And before, when we're relatively new to meditation vipassana practice, we may think, oh well, it seems like a pretty straightforward thing, a very serious practice, and it's just sitting, walking, some general activities, and that's it. But not so. So all sorts of unexpected experiences may come up. And the maxim for all of this remains to be what?
Did you note it?
What's that?
Did you note it?
Yes, did you note it? So the maxim remains, just be mindful, label and observe and know whatever comes along. So if you get tossed off your cushion, be mindful if you can. And certainly if the body is swaying wildly, then it's the same thing. And in the end, all of these experiences eventually will subside. Now, maybe just from a practical point of view, from a meditator's point of view, the attitude matters. If you sit there and the body keeps jumping off the cushion again and again, and you then get totally worried about what is happening, and then your mind is going into the future. Oh, if it's already this bad now, what is going to happen day after tomorrow? Then obviously you will have a hard time. So you will make life difficult for yourself. But if you take it with this, what's the word? With a sense of humor, then it's so much easier to handle all of these different experiences. Now, the last form of joy is Varana Piti, which then gets described in the Visuddhimagga as some pervading or rapturous sensations that pervade the entire body, and very pleasant sensations. Now, in the context of these 5 kinds of joy, once again we have the same set of 3 potential dangers, namely of craving, of pride and conceit, and also of wrong view. Now, how do we experience joy? Just for general knowledge, modern synonyms for it would be rapture, would be zest or a keen enjoyment, would be enthusiasm, excitement, elation, interest, euphoria, joyful interest, and then exuberance. Now, the Visuddhimagga defines this joy in the classical fourfold manner by saying that it has the characteristic of endearing, and its function is to refresh the mind and the body, and its second function is to pervade the body and mind, to thrill with rapture. And it is manifested as elation, and the mind and body are said to be its proximate cause. Now, the Venerable Sayadaw Pandita likes to describe the manifestation of joy by saying, or by giving it as a bubbly form of energy. Now, later on, we shall compare this joy to the mental factor of sukha, and in order to gain some better understanding there about the differences among or between the two. Now, the Visuddhimagga says that the proximate cause for the arising of joy is the mind and body. One could give other reasons. Joy may arise because of the absence of the hindrances, as well as the absence of physical pains. The Venerable Sayadaw Pandita explains it more or less along the same line, and he says, in the presence of mindfulness, the hindrances will gradually have to subside. With this, Chitta Viveka is there, namely seclusion of the mind. The mind is secluded from the hindrances, and with this, then joy can arise. Now, the next imperfection of insight is tranquility, passaddhi in the Pali scriptural language. Meditators have described this as follows by saying, my whole body felt very peaceful and tranquil, and sometimes saying that the mind was so peaceful and tranquil that one stayed without noting, without being really mindful for an hour or two. And some meditators, when this tranquility is present in the walking meditation, stop walking and just gaze for an extended period of time. Now, also, from a practical point of view, this tranquility may be experienced as stillness of the mind. So, in other words, absence of movement in the mind. Under normal circumstances, the mind is dashing this way, that way, to this sense door, that sense door, and yet another sense door, into the future, into the past, etc. So, usually there's a lot of movement going on in the mind. In the presence of passaddhi, of tranquility, this changes, and the mind then becomes still. Now, modern synonyms for tranquility would be peacefulness, non-agitation, stillness, serenity, quietness, and repose. Calmness, coolness of mind. Now, the classical definition for tranquility is that it has the characteristic of quieting down disturbances in the mental body and certain consciousness, respectively. And its function is to crush such disturbances, and it is manifested as peacefulness and certain coolness. And the proximate cause is the mental body and certain consciousness. And this tranquility as a mental factor is should be regarded as opposed to such defilements as restlessness and worry, uddhacca and kukucca in the Pali scriptural language, which creates distress and agitation in the stream of consciousness. Now, when early on in one's practice, much different hindrances occurred, and with this then also much agitation is present in the stream of consciousness, then naturally when finally the mind calms down and tranquility sets in, then this is a wonderful experience, and meditators usually like it a lot. And among the imperfections of insight that meditators for the most part mention first, it is calmness, or it is certain calmness that gets mentioned first. Now, this does not necessarily mean that the earlier imperfections don't occur. Sometimes meditators miss those, or simply don't think necessary to report them. Now, from a practical point of view, when tranquility arises in one's stream of consciousness and is quite predominant, then there is a fair likelihood that a number of related mental factors will also be present. And does any one of you know what those related mental factors could be? Wholesome mental factors. Mental factors that don't get mentioned that much.
Equanimity?
Not yet, that comes later. Underlying, yes, but it's not prominent yet. Concentration will also be there. Concentration is not per se a wholesome mental state. It's an ethically variable state. Or it's one of the universal signs. Pardon me?
These things like malleability.
There you go. That is correct. So there is a group of wholesome mental factors that in the Abhidhamma list, or the list from the Abhidhammata Sangha, follows tranquility. And those mental factors are lahuta, lightness of the consciousness and the mental body, and then, as Chris has pointed out, malleability, mudutta in the Pali scriptural language, and then there are others, namely kamyanata, and then also, which is wieldiness, and then we have furthermore proficiency, pagunyata, and then the last one is ujjukata, namely rectitude. And we won't have the time to go into each and every one of them, but maybe just to mention the characteristic and manifestation of them. So in the case of lightness has the characteristic of the subsiding of heaviness, and its function is to crush such heaviness, and it's manifested as non-sluggishness. And it is opposed to mental defilements such as sloth and torpor, which are said to create heaviness. In the case of mudutta, malleability. Its characteristic is that of the subsiding of rigidity, and rigidity is caused by unwholesome mental factors such as pride and conceit and wrong view. And so the function is to crush such rigidity, and it is manifested as non-resistance. In the case of wieldiness, kamanyata, its characteristic is the subsiding of unwieldiness, and then its function is to crush such unwieldiness, and it is manifested as as success of the mental body and certain consciousness in making something an object. And then, in the case of proficiency, pagunyata, its characteristic is that of healthiness, and its function is to crush unhealthiness. And it is manifested as absence of disability. And unhealthiness is, according to the Abhidhamma, created or caused by unwholesome mental states such as lack of faith, so skeptical, doubt, and others. And then the last one is rectitude, ujjukata, and its characteristic is that of uprightness or straightforwardness, and its function is to crush trickiness of the mind or crookedness of the mind, and it is opposed to hypocrisy and fraudulence. So sometimes it can be quite interesting if one has some understanding of the Abhidhamma, and if one knows, if one knows from one's meditation practice, well, calmness is there, then coming from the Abhidhamma, one could check, are some of those other wholesome mental states, as mentioned, are they present in the mind or not? And one might actually find at least some of them to be present. They're, the ones mentioned just now, they're not that easy to discern. However, lahuta, for instance, is obvious, and then ujjukata, rectitude, is also obvious. And the wieldiness, let me see. The wieldiness also can be discerned. Anyways, as usual, based on an experience of tranquility, of lightness, and then malleability, etc., one should not fall prey to the potential danger of craving, of pride and conceit, and wrong view. Now, if one manages if one is well aware of these three potential dangers, then whenever calmness arises, one will recognize it quickly, and then simply just label it, observe it in a non-attached manner, treat it as just another object, nothing special, no need to get caught here, and then the practice will move ahead. Now, the next imperfection of insight is that of sukha, namely happiness, and so this may be actually quite a major experience. Now, this happiness we experience in many different ways. Could you mention some aspects that you have noticed in your own meditation practice? aspects of happiness. No happiness. Oh.
I would say like feeling connected to everything, happy and connected, just like not separate from anything.
Not separate from the outside world.
Yeah, not perceiving myself as separate. So
Oh,
softening of the boundaries.
Oh, softening of the boundaries. Yes, and it's interesting what you're saying. Yes, you have something?
Less unwholesome thoughts. I don't.
Unwholesome thoughts?
Less.
Or less unwholesome thoughts? Most likely, yes. Apart from this?
Ease.
Ease. There you go, is correct. Ease of body and mind. And instead of ease, we can also say comfort. Anything else?
Walking, sense of tranquility and joy. Is like a feeling of happiness.
Not really.
No.
There you go. There you go. And a number of you have experienced this in your meditation practice and have even reported it. So there may be a general sense of well-being, physically as well as mental, and the well-being. So you just another way of expressing it would be to say there's a sense of contented. You're contented with what is going on in your practice. You're contented with what you're experiencing within. You don't need anything in addition to this. And an ice cream is not necessary to make your day. And
Sometimes people describe the feeling of sweetness.
yes, certain one could.
Common
Mhm.
description
One could.
of that of sukha.
Yes. So as sweetness and another common experience. You have something? No? Pardon me?
I'm just biting my nail.
Oh, you're biting your nails. Well, another very common or very obvious aspect is that when there is happiness in the mind or contentment, then the body tends to be pretty relaxed. There is no muscular or no excessive being tensed up, all tensed up. And so there's a tremendous sense of relaxation, and sometimes meditators have described this. People have said they feel like having received a full body massage, and so the body there's no tension left in the body whatsoever, or the body feels rubber-like, and when this happiness, sukha, is predominant, usually it goes along with an absence of bodily pains and aches. And if pains and aches are present, they are going to be rather mild. So just some minor pains here and there, but nothing major. Now, the Venerable Sayadaw Pandita, during talks that he has given in Lumbini in 1999, has stated that when sukha is present, the presence of sukha may help or contribute to cure certain chronic diseases. So it may contribute to overcoming some illness. And this then in connection also maybe with the enlightenment factors. The enlightenment factors are being attributed a curative quality. The Visuddhimagga defines sukha as an exceedingly refined happiness, or it refers to it as bliss or pleasure flooding one's entire body. Now, when we compare this happiness, sukha, with joy and rapture, what do you think? Which one is coarser? The sukha is coarser, or the joy is coarser? The joy is coarser. Yes, is correct. And so, when one first experiences joy, one might think this is the greatest experience. However, a few days down the road, one realizes there are more refined things around. Now, based on an experience of joy, tranquility, and certain happiness, sukha, piti, passaddhi, and certain sukha, one might experience what is known as Dhamma delight. And in this regard, the Dhamma, or the Buddha has spoken a verse which is recorded as Dhammapada verse 373, and it goes as follows: Sunyagaram pavitasa santa chittasa bhikkhuno amanusi rati hoti samadhamam vipassato. The English rendering of this is as follows: the bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, and lay meditator who goes into seclusion to meditate, whose mind is tranquil, who clearly perceives the Dhamma, experiences a delight which transcends that of ordinary men and women. And this Dhamma delight is not based on going to the movies and then gaining some pleasure from this, or going to a restaurant and eating some expensive and tasty food. And it's also not dependent on drinking wine or whatever else one might be interested in. So there is a big difference between the happiness, the Dhamma happiness or Dhamma delight that arises out of the meditation practice, which is more or less free from dangers, and certainly then the ordinary pleasures that we derive from indulging in, or the happiness that we gain when indulging in sense pleasures. Now, once again, when this happiness, contentment arises, there is certainly a good chance that certain one might crave for it, that certain one might get conceited about or with it, and certainly mistake it for an experience of noble path knowledge and certainly fruition knowledge, which of course is not certainly the case. Now, the remaining imperfections are those of determined faith, which basically means that one, based on illumination, based on keen knowledge, on joy, on tranquility, and certain happiness, based on all these wonderful experiences, well, naturally, one's faith in the practice will go up. All these wonderful things happening, and certainly then all the suffering from earlier on is forgotten, and certainly with this, then one's faith is not just an ordinary faith anymore, but rather it becomes a determined faith, or it turns, or one might call it a conviction. One is convinced that this is the proper practice, this is the proper path to take. And out of an experience of strong or determined faith, adimokha, a meditator may then experience various certain things, like frequent thoughts about how wonderful the practice is, thoughts of gratitude towards the Buddha and towards the Sangha, the teachers, and then also there may be thoughts arising. One might be planning already one's next retreat, and some meditators might even be plotting out their Dhamma, their career as a Dhamma teacher. And I've heard not too many, not too few. Not too few meditators confessing that they were in the mind, sitting in meditation, already putting together their first Dhamma talk that they were going to give at home to their family. So this is not so uncommon. And then, with this faith or conviction, one has to be careful that it does not go overboard. And so, what does this mean? Faith going overboard. So one has all these wonderful experiences and then feels strongly impelled to bow down to the Buddha's statue. Once and twice and 3 times, which is okay up to this point. But then, if it's the bowing doesn't end and goes on for 10-20 minutes, then this might be a little bit too much. And now, based on a strong faith or a determined faith, naturally one will be inclined to make more or be inclined to ensure that one's mindfulness is more continuous. And so with this, then one's mindfulness tends to become, or one's mindfulness tends to gain new qualities. And if earlier on one's mindfulness was somewhat sluggish, slow, then it becomes dynamic. If earlier on one had to make much effort to be mindful in a really continuous manner, now this is happening easily. And if previously one was missing predominant objects over and over again, now even without proper aiming at an object, the mind will automatically, or the attention will automatically go to the center of the object. And without any delay will the observing mind be with the object. So mindfulness tends to be dynamic, easy, continuous, without missing an object, without delay, swift, sharp, and light. Now, since this is quite outstanding, again, one might get caught up in this fabulous mindfulness and suddenly then start craving for more of the same, or get conceited, or take this to be a sign for having attained the supramundane path and fruition knowledge. And as a well-informed meditator, we don't go for this, and we simply are aware of the qualities, these new qualities of mindfulness, and we just keep on observing whatever comes along. Now, the second last imperfection is that of awajana upekkha, namely equanimity in adverting. And this then is of 2 kinds, namely equanimity in insight, and the second one is equanimity in adverting. The Visuddhimagga explains the 2 as follows. The first one, equanimity in insight, is basically neutrality in the investigation of formations. In Pali it's known as simply tatra majjhatthata. And the reason for this neutrality in the investigation of formations is is, because one has observed this whole range of formations already so many times, that one is well familiar with this, and thus the mind is no longer excited about various intriguing objects. Now, the second aspect of upekkha is avajana upekkha, which means equanimity in adverting in the mind door. And the mind, when an object arises in the mind door, like a thought or a mental state or whatnot, a memory, then the mind has to turn towards it, advert towards it, and that adverting then works incisively and sharply as a lightning flash. Now, once again, one could certainly crave for more of the same, and certainly also get conceit because of this, and certainly mistake it to be a supramundane experience. Now, in the case of nikanti attachment, this is an imperfection that underlies all of the other earlier 9 imperfections, and so one then gets attached to experiences of illumination, of knowledge and joy, and so on and so forth. Now, just maybe one final point. These imperfections of insight mark a very important point on one's path towards liberation. And so it's kind of like coming to a crossroads, and the road, one road going in one direction and another road going in a different direction. And not informed meditator will take the wrong path and get attached to all of these imperfections, will develop a craving for them, etc., etc. And as a result of this, then get stuck in his or her practice. So in other words, that path is kind of like a dead end. And at first one doesn't see it, but if one experiences calmness for 10 days in a row, what do you think? Will it still be fascinating? Not anymore. And then eventually one will get the message that even this wonderful calmness needs to be labeled, one needs to be mindful of it, and one needs to know its nature and eventually let go of it. Now, the other path is the correct path, and that other path is the path of just being mindful or applying mindfulness to each and every of those imperfections and treating them as as one would treat any ordinary object. So just labeling, observing, and knowing each and every of those imperfections. So gradually one will then let go of the non-path, the wrong path, and satna then will remember to be mindful again in a continuous manner, and with this one will be traveling the correct satna path, and a path that eventually will lead to the realization of noble path and fruition knowledge. Now, the 10 imperfections of insight are important to experience during a retreat, because it's overall a very rewarding experience, and meditators then will feel inspired to continue with their meditation practice, and will want to gain the goal, even though they are not aware of the difficulties coming up in the future. however, it gives them the impetus to move ahead. And so at this, the imperfections of insight also show a meditator the potential of the mind. What is certainly possible? And these the imperfections may be helpful for our daily life, in particular equanimity, because it arises at this point for the first time in a clear-cut manner. One starts to get a taste for it, a feel for it, and then after the retreat one can take this experience into one's daily life, and in challenging situations apply equanimity as best as possible. So this then brings us to the end of our talk. Let me conclude by wishing, may you experience that purification, which is known as purification of what is the path and what is not the path, Magga Magga Jnana Dasana Visuddhi in the Pali scriptural language. May you not get fooled to take the wrong path, but rather recognize what the correct path is. May you walk happily and certainly with good effort and joy along the correct path. Observe whatever predominant object comes along, whether it's desirable or undesirable, it doesn't matter. And eventually may you experience the peace of Nibbana during this very retreat here in Taos, New Mexico. And this is it for now. And I apologize for taking so long. Okay, no more questions today?
I just wanted that.
Yes.
Should I leave it?
No, let's go briefly here.
If you notice that, say, first thing every morning when you begin your practice, calmness arises repeatedly over many days.
Yes.
Is that not indication that there's a desire in the mind to move in that direction that precedes the experience of calmness? And shouldn't that be noticed first and labeled? I mean, there's this, you're making this distinction between what is and what is not the path. But preceding these repeated experiences is this tendency of the mind to crave the experience. And can that not be noticed in order to avoid this dilemma?
Oh, the situation that you're describing should be seen as follows. If calmness is present right away at the beginning of a sitting, then this gives you kind of where the baseline is of your practice. So your practice is up to a point where calmness is most predominant. And so then, that being so, you then simply just apply mindfulness to the calmness, and you make sure you don't get carried away by it. I know, as simple as that. And if earlier on you would get totally excited about this or carried away by the calmness, and then after a couple of days of experiencing calmness at the beginning of a sitting, of the first sitting in the day, then gradually you get to the point, oh well, it's just another experience, and then right away you start being mindful of it. And then sooner or later it will pass, and some other experience will become more predominant, or other mental state. I don't know. Yes? Okay. That's it, no more. Next Dhamma talk will be tomorrow.